Raymond Holt had a system for everything. His boarding pass was printed the night before, folded twice and slipped into the left breast pocket of his jacket. Not his wallet, not his carry-on, his jacket. His jacket always went on last. He arrived at Toronto Pearson exactly 94 minutes before departure, which gave him time for coffee, time to walk Gate D without rushing, and time to sit in the third row of seats from the window, the ones with the clearest view of the tarmac. He had done this for 31 years. What Raymond had not accounted for on a Tuesday morning in February was ice. Not on the runway, on the road. A transport truck had jackknifed on the 427 just past Dixon, and what should have been a 40-minute drive from Mississauga became 2 hours and 17 minutes of brake lights and radio news, and a very quiet kind of dread settling into his chest. He had watched the minutes disappear the way money did when you weren't paying attention. One at a time, until suddenly you looked up and there was nothing left. He missed the flight by 11 minutes. The gate agent was apologetic. She offered the next available departure, Thursday morning. Raymond thanked her, collected his bag, and walked to a row of seats near the arrivals hall. Not the gate, not the coffee kiosk, the arrivals hall. Because he needed to think, and he thought better where there was movement. Other people arriving. People who were going somewhere or coming back from somewhere, their faces carrying the small private relief of the almost home. He sat down and pulled out his phone. 3 emails. His assistant had already rebooked his hotel in Vancouver. A client meeting rescheduled for Thursday afternoon. His daughter Elaine, asking if he wanted her to pick him up. He typed back, "I'm fine, don't come out." He was 61 years old and had been saying "I'm fine" to Elaine since she was 7. She had stopped believing him around the time she turned 30, but neither of them talked about that directly. Raymond set his phone face down on his knee and looked out at the terminal. That was when he saw the woman. She was not sitting on the floor, which was the first thing he noticed. Not because it would have been strange, but because he would have understood it. He had spent enough mornings in enough airports to know that people found their own ways to manage exhaustion. She was sitting in the seat directly beside a support pillar, the kind of seat that was slightly removed from the main row, angled toward nothing in particular. Her coat was a dark green that had faded unevenly at the shoulders, as if it had spent many winters doing more work than coats were meant to do. She had a single bag at her feet, a canvas tote with fraying handles, and she was holding it by the strap with both hands, the way someone holds something they are afraid of losing. She looked, Raymond thought, like a person who had been awake for a very long time. He looked away. His flight was in 38 hours. He had a hotel shuttle coming. He had a system, but she was still there when he looked back. And she was crying, not dramatically, not in a way that asked for attention. The kind of crying that people did when they had forgotten to hide it, or when they were too tired to bother. Raymond Holt had, over the course of his life, walked past a great many things that were not his business. He picked up his bag and moved 2 seats closer. He did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the arrivals board, a flight from Calgary, a flight from Halifax, a flight delayed from Winnipeg. "Do you need something?" he asked. Not "Are you okay?" He had never much liked that question. The answer was almost always a lie. The woman looked at him. She was younger than he had thought, mid-30s maybe, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested the last several weeks, not just the last several hours. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and straightened slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't need to be sorry." She looked at him for another moment the way people did when they were deciding whether someone was safe. Raymond was accustomed to this. He wore a gray jacket that had been good once and was now simply comfortable. He drove a 2009 Civic that his daughter had once, gently, suggested he replace. He had the kind of face that people described, when they described it at all, as steady. "I'm trying to get to Sudbury," the woman said finally. "That's about 4 hours north." "I know, my mother." She stopped, pressed her lips together. She had a stroke last night. "My brother called me at 2 in the morning and I got here as fast as I could, but there are no buses until tomorrow evening and she looked at her bag. "I don't have enough for a flight." Raymond's nothing for a moment. "Where's your car?" "I don't have one." "I take the subway. I live on Bloor." He nodded slowly. He had already started doing the mental arithmetic that he did whenever a situation presented him with variables. Not emotional arithmetic, he had never been especially good at that, but the practical kind. The kind that asked, What are the pieces, and what can be moved? His car was in the long-term lot. Lot C, row 11, the blue Civic. He wasn't going to Vancouver until Thursday. The car would sit there for 2 days regardless. What if she doesn't bring it back? Said one part of his mind. It's a 2009 Civic, said another. He almost smiled. My car is in the long-term lot, Raymond said. I wasn't going to use it until Thursday. She looked at him. It's not much of a car, he said honestly. But it runs. Heater works. It'll get you to Sudbury. The woman, her name, she told him, was Catherine Boone, stared at him with an expression that moved through several stages in the span of about 4 seconds. Confusion, a kind of guarded hope. Then the familiar pulling back, the reflex of someone who had learned not to take things at face value. I don't understand, Catherine said. You don't know me. No, Raymond agreed. Why would you? She shook her head slightly. I could take your car and never come back. You could, he said. But I don't think you will. How do you know that? Raymond thought about it. He was not a man who spoke carelessly, and he did not intend to start. I don't, he said finally. Not for certain. But you're not trying to get somewhere for yourself. You're trying to get to your mother. He paused. That matters. To the kind of people it matters to. Catherine Boone looked at him for a long time. The arrivals board clicked behind them. A family swept past with a luggage cart and a child who was insisting loudly that he was not tired. I'll pay for gas, she said, and I'll bring it back Thursday morning. I'll have it back before 8, gates in my glove box, Raymond said. Long-term lot entrance is back the way you came in, past the departures drop-off. Lot C, the car's a blue Civic 2009. Plate says he wrote it on a piece of paper from his pocket. He was, as mentioned, a man who still carried paper. There's a Tim's coffee still in the cup holder from this morning. I wasn't going to drink it anyway. She took the paper. Her hands were not entirely steady. Who are you? She asked. It came out like it was not quite the question she meant to ask, but the closest she could find. Raymond Holt. He stood and picked up his bag. I hope your mother's all right. He walked to the hotel shuttle bay without looking back. He was not sure entirely why he didn't look back. Perhaps because looking back would have meant asking himself whether he was being foolish, and he had already decided he wasn't, and he saw no reason to revisit settled questions. The hotel was a Marriott off Dixon Road. Clean, quiet, the kind of place that did not try too hard. Raymond checked in, set his shoes by the door in the particular way he always did, ordered a bowl of soup from room service, and sat by the window watching the planes come and go. He did not think about the car very much. He thought about his daughter Elaine, who called him stoic the way other people used the word difficult. He thought about his late wife Margaret, who had died 3 years ago, and who had always been the one in their marriage who talked to strangers. At grocery stores, at gas stations, on commuter trains. She had a gift for making people feel located, seen, as if they were standing in the right place and she had simply confirmed it. He thought for a while that what he had done this morning had probably been, in some way, about Margaret. Then he thought that was too easy an explanation, and probably not quite true. He slept earlier than usual. Planes moved past the window, blinking red and white, and he watched them until he didn't. He spent Wednesday the way he spent most unexpected free days. He read. He walked. He had breakfast at a diner on Dixie Road, where the coffee came without being asked and the eggs were fried properly. He called his assistant about the Thursday meeting. He did not call Elaine because she would ask questions he was not ready to answer in a tidy way, and he preferred to have tidy answers. He did not call anyone about the car. At 6:52 Thursday morning, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's back. Lot C, row 11. I put gas in. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but I don't have another word for it. Catherine, he read it twice, then a third time slowly, the way he read contracts. A second message came while he was still looking at the first. My mother woke up Wednesday afternoon. The doctors think she's going to be okay. I sat with her all day. She asked who I was 3 times and then remembered and cried each time she forgot and then remembered again. It was the hardest and the best thing I've ever done. Raymond sat on the edge of the hotel bed in his gray jacket and his reading glasses, and he did not, particularly, do anything for a moment. He just held the phone and looked at the message. He had driven his wife to the hospital once when she'd had a bad fall. He remembered sitting in the waiting room while they assessed her, how the waiting was its own kind of work, how the hands did not know what to do with themselves, how you sat with a magazine you didn't read, and the words ran together, and all you were really doing was listening for your name. He typed back, "I'm glad she's awake. Safe travels." He almost left it there. Then he added, "The coffee was cold anyway." He was not by nature a man who said more than was necessary. But sometimes the unnecessary thing was also the true thing, and Margaret had always told him those were worth saying. He went down to the shuttle, took it back to the terminal, checked in for his Vancouver flight, and found his seat in the third row from the window in Gate D. He had 40 minutes. He bought a coffee, this time a fresh one, and sat down and looked out at the tarmac. A plane was pushing back from the gate across the way. He watched the ground crew move with their deliberate, practiced signals. The batons, the careful distance, the way they stepped back when the engines began to turn. There was something he had always admired about people who knew exactly where to stand. He thought about Catherine Boone driving north through the February dark. The 400 at 2 in the morning, past Barrie, past the turnoffs for places with names like Coldwater and Wabauchon. He had driven that road many times. He knew how the lights thinned out past Perry Sound, how the landscape opened into something older and quieter, how on a clear night the stars came back with a force that the city had made you forget they had. He thought about her mother, waking up in a hospital room in Sudbury. Confused, then recognizing, then confused again. He thought about how many times he had sat in a room with someone who was trying to hold on to themselves, and how the sitting there was the only thing anyone could actually do, and how that was both less than you wanted and more than it seemed. His flight was called. Raymond finished his coffee, folded his boarding pass the way he always folded it, and stood. He was not a sentimental man. He had built his life on the understanding that things worked best when they were organized, when roles were clear, when expectations were honest. He did not romanticize the world or his place in it. He paid his taxes on time and kept his promises, and did not, as a rule, give his car to strangers in airports. He had done it once. Now, he thought he would probably do it again. There was a woman on the plane, middle seat, 2 rows behind him, who was traveling alone with a toddler who kept dropping a plastic dinosaur and picking it up and dropping it again. The woman had that particular look, the tightly held composure of someone who was one small thing away from coming undone. Raymond in the aisle seat reached down on the 3rd drop, picked up the dinosaur, and handed it back without being asked. The woman said thank you, exhausted and genuine. Raymond nodded. It wasn't anything. It was also, in the way that small things sometimes were, everything. The plane lifted into the gray February sky, banking west over the lake, and Toronto fell away beneath them. The grid of streets, the white patches of parks still holding snow, the silver thread of the lake bending toward the horizon. From up here, it all looked organized, purposeful, each road leading somewhere specific, each building the result of someone's decision to put something exactly there. He pressed his forehead very slightly against the cold of the window. He thought about what Catherine had written. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but I don't have another word for it." He understood that. He had spent most of his adult life in the business of measuring things precisely. Costs, timelines, risks, returns. He knew the value of exact language. But there were moments that exceeded the available vocabulary, and the honest thing was to say so. He also knew this. It was easier to give a thing when you held it loosely to begin with. The car had never been precious to him. It was transportation. It was a means. What had felt like risk on Tuesday morning had not, by Thursday, felt like anything other than the obvious thing to have done. The obvious thing was not always easy, but it was rarely as difficult as the anticipation of it. He leaned back, closed his eyes. He had a meeting in Vancouver at 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon. He had a hotel with a decent gym. He had a client who talked too much and an agenda that would take approximately 40 minutes if people stayed on topic, which they would not. He had, in his bag, a novel he had been meaning to finish since November. He had, somewhere behind him in a long-term parking lot in Mississauga, a 2009 Civic with a full tank of gas. And he had, for the first time in a longer while than he cared to examine, the particular feeling of having done something that required no explanation. Margaret had always said he made things too complicated, that most decisions were simple once you removed the noise. He had spent a great many years believing she meant financial decisions, or professional ones, and only recently had begun to understand that she might have meant all of them. He opened his novel. The plane leveled off above the cloud line, into the winter blue that existed only up here, clean and vast and very still. Raymond Holt read 3 pages before he fell asleep, which was for him a personal record.